A well-dressed woman walks into an upscale mall only to be ignored by a salesperson who assumes she's out of place. But when the woman reveals she owns the entire mall, everything changes in an instant. What happens next will leave you questioning how quickly we judge others based on their appearance, and the consequences that follow when those judgments are shattered. Before we start, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos. Tasha entered the mall, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfumes and fresh coffee, mingling with the hum of conversations from the busy afternoon shoppers. It was the kind of mall that made people look twice, a place where the rich and powerful were often the only ones treated like they truly belonged. She glanced at the high-end stores lining the halls, their glass windows reflecting the bright fluorescent lights overhead. People bustled in and out, their designer bags swaying with every step. But Tasha didn't fit the usual picture. She wasn't here to blend in with the crowd. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. A couple of heads turned as she walked past, and a few shoppers gave her curious glances. Most would assume she was just another person passing through, maybe on her way to grab a coffee or window shop. But Tasha wasn't the type to be easily overlooked. She had an air of confidence that commanded attention, though she never needed to say a word to make it clear she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She had a destination, and today she wasn't interested in casual browsing. She made her way toward the boutique she had in mind, a high-end clothing store with a sleek, modern design. The large glass door slid open as she approached, and she stepped inside, immediately noticing the polished displays of clothing, fancy dresses, tailored suits, and accessories that screamed luxury. She paused, scanning the racks. There was a quiet hum in the air, broken only by the soft rustle of clothes and the distant sound of soft music playing overhead. The boutique was almost too quiet, in that perfect, controlled way that made it feel exclusive, like it was built for only a select few. Behind the counter stood Emily, the salesperson, a young woman with an air of entitlement. She stood straight, glancing at the mirror every now and then, adjusting her appearance like she was the one the store was meant for. Her sharp eyes noticed Tasha almost immediately. She hadn't seen her around before, but there was something about the way Tasha carried herself that didn't quite match the typical shopper. Tasha wasn't wearing a label that screamed wealth, at least not the obvious ones. Her style was understated, but it carried an elegance that made Emily feel slightly uneasy. Still, Emily gave a polite, rehearsed smile as she watched Tasha make her way further into the store. "Can I help you with anything?" Emily asked, her voice friendly but laced with a slight condescension, the kind of politeness that didn't reach her eyes. She had already made her assumption. This woman didn't look like she belonged in this store. She looked out of place. She was too calm, too poised, and something about her made Emily feel like this wasn't going to be a simple transaction. Tasha didn't seem to notice the judgment in Emily's tone. She smiled back, a slight curve of the lips. "I'm looking for something special," she said, her voice low but clear. There was no urgency in her words, but there was intent. She looked around the store, taking in the displays, her gaze sweeping over the expensive dresses and tailored suits. Her eyes rested on a particular dress, a beautiful deep emerald green that shimmered faintly under the lights. "That dress! It's stunning," Tasha said, almost to herself, her voice trailing off. She stepped closer to the rack, studying it, but Emily, still standing behind the counter, wasn't about to offer help just yet. She didn't think this woman was serious. She couldn't possibly be. "It's a popular piece," Emily said, her tone still casual but with a hint of superiority. "It's out of stock, though. We've been sold out for a while." She folded her arms, watching Tasha's reaction with a kind of quiet amusement. She expected disappointment, maybe even confusion. Maybe she thought Tasha would give up or walk out of the store, assuming it was simply not meant to be. Tasha didn't blink. She turned back to Emily, not a hint of frustration on her face. "Out of stock?" she asked. "Funny, I remember seeing it here just last week." Emily's smile faltered for just a second. She hadn't expected Tasha to know that. She hadn't expected her to push back, not when the woman didn't look like the type who would demand much attention. "Well," Emily said quickly, trying to cover the moment of doubt, "we get new shipments in, but that particular item goes fast. We can't always keep up with demand." Tasha gave a small nod, not really agreeing or disagreeing, just observing. "I see," she said, her eyes never leaving Emily's. "But I'm sure you can check in the back, right? You might have one left." The request was simple, but it was the way she said it that caught Emily off guard. Tasha wasn't asking like a regular customer. There was an underlying confidence in her voice, like she had every right to be here, every right to ask for exactly what she wanted. Emily hesitated for a moment, not quite sure how to handle the situation. She glanced around the store, then at the other shoppers, and then back at Tasha. Something was off, and Emily couldn't quite put her finger on it. "I'll check, but I'm not sure," she said, walking toward the back room, trying to hide her discomfort. Tasha remained where she was, standing by the rack of dresses, her eyes tracing the fabric. There was a moment of silence as Emily disappeared into the back, and the tension in the air seemed to grow thicker. Tasha wasn't just any customer, and Emily was beginning to realize it. A few minutes passed before Emily returned from the back room, her face tight and a little flushed. She had a few other items in her hands, but not the dress. "I'm afraid we don't have any more in stock," she said, placing the items on a counter with a small clink. Her voice was softer now, almost apologetic, but there was still an underlying sense of superiority. She expected Tasha to accept this politely and move on, like most people would in this store. But Tasha didn't seem to be most people. Tasha gave a slight nod, not looking surprised at all. She'd expected this, but she hadn't expected the discomfort she felt in the air now. Emily's eyes kept darting from the clothes to Tasha, trying to assess whether the woman would walk away or push back again. It was almost like Emily couldn't decide if she was in control of the situation anymore. "That's fine," Tasha said, her voice smooth and even. "I didn't really want the dress anyway. I'm just curious, how do you decide who gets helped first here? I mean, I've noticed that you've been very attentive to everyone else who's come in, but I'm sure I'm just imagining it." She didn't smile as she said this, but there was a quiet intensity in her words, a sharpness that made Emily hesitate. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. She had no idea where this was going, and the way Tasha was speaking, like she was some sort of authority, was making her more uncomfortable by the second. Emily cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "I'm sorry if it seemed that way. I try to give everyone the attention they need. She stopped herself, glancing at the other customers who were browsing, still oblivious to the growing tension between the two women. "I didn't mean to make you feel ignored. Maybe I can help with something else?" she asked, the offer sounding empty even to her own ears. Tasha didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her gaze steady, studying Emily. It was as if she were reading her, figuring her out in a way that made Emily's skin prickle. "You know," Tasha began, her voice low but sharp, "it's funny how people like me always end up at the back of the line, even when we're the ones bringing the money in." Her words cut through the air almost like a challenge. She didn't raise her voice, but there was a firmness in her tone that made Emily's stomach drop. Emily shifted, not knowing how to respond. She looked around, hoping that maybe another customer would interrupt or that someone would come in to take the focus off the conversation. But the store felt like it was closing in on her. "I don't—" Emily started, but Tasha cut her off before she could finish. "You don't have to explain," Tasha said calmly. "I'm sure it's just an oversight. I've had that happen before, you know, where people just don't notice the way they treat others. Happens more often than you think, actually." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words hang in the air before continuing. "But here's the thing. I don't need any favors. I don't need to be helped." She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Emily's. "What I need is for you to stop treating me like I'm not worth your time." Emily's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and confusion bubbling inside her. She didn't know whether to apologize, explain, or just leave it. But the more she looked at Tasha, the more she felt that there was something more going on here, something she didn't understand yet. The silence between them thickened. Emily's thoughts raced, but she was unsure of where this conversation was heading. Tasha, on the other hand, seemed perfectly composed, as if she had all the time in the world to let Emily figure it out. "So," Tasha said after a moment, her tone casual, almost as if she were talking about the weather, "do you know how many people like me own places like this?" She raised an eyebrow, her words landing with unexpected weight. Emily blinked, unsure of how to respond. I'm not sure I follow," she said, her confusion growing. Tasha let out a small sigh, as though the answer should have been obvious. "Well, I guess you'll find out soon enough," she said, giving a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But don't worry, it's not really a big deal. I just thought it might be time for a little conversation about customer service." She let the words linger in the air before turning her back slightly to the counter, as if waiting for Emily to catch up. Emily stood frozen, her mind racing, but she couldn't make sense of any of it. She had no idea what Tasha was talking about, but something in the air had shifted, and it left Emily feeling more uncertain than ever before. The tension was palpable, thickening with every passing second. Emily stood there, unsure how to proceed. She watched Tasha's back as the woman casually turned toward the counter, the quiet confidence in her posture making Emily feel smaller by the moment. The store, once filled with the soft hum of customers and the occasional rustle of fabric, now felt unnervingly still. Tasha didn't wait for a response. Instead, she took a deep breath and then glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Emily's. "You're probably wondering what I meant," she said, her voice even but laced with an almost imperceptible smile. "Well, it's simple. I own this entire mall." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment they didn't seem to register in Emily's mind. She blinked, her thoughts scrambling to catch up. "What?" she stammered, her voice betraying her confusion. You own the mall?" Tasha didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step forward, casually reaching out to touch one of the items on display, as if inspecting it for the first time. "Yes," she said, her tone cool and matter-of-fact. "I own this mall, all of it. Every single store, every shop, every inch of this place. It's mine." Emily felt her throat tighten as she tried to process what she was hearing. That can't be right," she muttered, her mind racing. You're just a shopper. I mean, you don't look like—" Tasha interrupted her with a soft laugh, a sound that held no trace of mockery, just a calm, knowing kind of amusement. "I don't look like I own a mall, right?" she said, her eyes flicking over Emily as if reading her every thought. "Funny how people are always so quick to judge based on appearances. You assumed I was just here to buy a dress, didn't you? You assumed I was like everyone else who walks in here, looking to drop a couple $100. But you see, the truth is, I don't need to buy anything. I own it all." Emily's face flushed with embarrassment, her earlier assumptions crashing down in an instant. I didn't mean to," she started, but her voice trailed off, unsure how to backpedal from what had just been said. Tasha turned to face her fully now, the earlier distance between them closing in a way that made Emily feel even more exposed. "It's okay," Tasha said, her voice still calm, though there was an edge to it now. "You weren't the first person to make that mistake. People like you, people in positions like yours, they assume all sorts of things about people like me." She stepped closer to Emily, her gaze never leaving hers. "But I'm not like the other customers. I don't just buy the stuff you sell here. I make the decisions. I set the policies." Emily's pulse quickened, the realization dawning on her with a sharpness that felt almost painful. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't process it fast enough, couldn't understand how she had missed the signs, how she had assumed someone like Tasha couldn't possibly be in charge of something like this. Tasha must have noticed the bewildered look on Emily's face because her expression softened just a little. "Don't worry, I'm not here to make a scene. I just thought you might like to know exactly who you're dealing with." She paused, letting the silence settle between them for a moment. "You see, Emily, it's not just about the dress or the money you make selling it. It's about how you treat people who walk through that door, people who might look different or act different, people who, in your eyes, might not even belong here." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the weight of Tasha's words settle in her chest. She opened her mouth again, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think. I just—" "I know," Tasha interrupted gently, her tone now almost soothing. "You didn't think. And that's the problem. People like you, people who are used to being in control, don't think twice about who they're serving. You assume things based on how people look, based on where they're from. It's a reflex, I get it. But it doesn't make it right." Emily took a step back, her mind spinning. She felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted and she was struggling to find her footing. How had she let this happen? How had she let herself fall into this trap of assumption and bias? Tasha watched her, her expression unreadable now, as if she were waiting for Emily to come to some kind of realization. And then, as if sensing the perfect moment, she added, "You know, I think it's time we had a little conversation about the future of this place, about what it means to truly serve every customer that walks through these doors. Maybe it's time for some changes, don't you think?" The weight of Tasha's words hit Emily all at once. It wasn't just about a mistake or a simple misunderstanding. It was about something much bigger. And Emily could feel it, the pressure of accountability pressing down on her, just as it was pressing down on the entire mall, its customers, its employees, everything. Tasha turned her back on Emily then, her confidence never wavering. She glanced around the store one last time, as if taking in everything she had just seen, before she started to walk away. Emily stood frozen in place, her mouth dry, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was only the beginning. As Tasha walked toward the door, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the otherwise silent store. Emily remained where she stood, staring at the space where Tasha had been just moments before. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a wave of guilt washed over her like a cold rush of water. She hadn't been able to process it at first, but now, as she replayed the conversation in her head, the truth seemed to hit harder with each passing second. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a customer entering the store. Emily immediately turned toward the door, trying to shake off the overwhelming sense of discomfort that had taken hold of her. She forced a smile, ready to return to her role as the cheerful salesperson. But it felt hollow now. She couldn't stop thinking about Tasha, the calm way she had exposed Emily's own biases. It was like a spotlight had been cast on everything she had never questioned before, everything she had assumed. The customer, a middle-aged woman dressed in expensive clothes, didn't seem to notice the tension in the air. She greeted Emily with a warm smile, and Emily returned it, though it didn't reach her eyes. She found herself going through the motions, guiding the woman toward the latest collection, all the while her mind wandering back to Tasha. Who was she, really? How had she been able to reveal so much about Emily without even trying? As Emily led the woman around the store, she kept glancing toward the entrance, half expecting Tasha to walk back in. Part of her hoped the woman would return so they could finish the conversation. Another part of her wished she could forget it all and move on, pretend it hadn't happened. But something told her that wasn't an option. Tasha had made sure of that. After a few minutes, Emily found herself standing at the counter, still processing everything. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of shame and curiosity. She had to know more. How could someone like Tasha, someone who didn't fit into the usual mold of a customer, own the entire mall? What had led her to this point? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a voice behind her. She turned to find the store manager, a middle-aged man named Greg, standing at the door of the back room. He looked at her with a slight frown, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Emily, you doing okay?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Emily nodded quickly, but it was clear from her stiff posture that she wasn't fine. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Greg didn't seem convinced. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I heard some things about what happened with that customer. Are you sure everything's okay?" Emily's eyes widened, a jolt of panic rushing through her. She hadn't realized anyone had overheard her conversation with Tasha. She tried to hide her anxiety, but it was impossible. I I don't know what you mean," she stammered, avoiding Greg's gaze. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not here to make a big deal out of it, but I think you might want to take a step back and think about how you handle situations like this. There's been talk around the mall about how you treated a certain customer." Emily's stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her throat dry. Greg hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his tone serious. "I'm sure you don't realize it, but there's a lot of pressure on all of us to treat every customer equally. Emily Blinn. And I don't think you were aware of who that woman was, were you?" Emily blinked, confusion clouding her thoughts. "What are you talking about?" she repeated, more urgently now. "Who was she?" Greg looked around nervously before leaning in a little closer. "The woman you spoke to. She owns the entire mall." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm guessing you didn't know that, did you?" For the second time that day, Emily's world seemed to shift under her feet. The words, "own the entire mall," echoed in her mind, and she suddenly felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but the shame was overwhelming. She'd just assumed she was dealing with another customer, someone who didn't belong in the store, someone she could dismiss. But Tasha had exposed her in a way that was impossible to ignore. I didn't know," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the weight of her own ignorance pressing down on her. Greg looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "It's not just about her. It's about how we treat everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from. You can't judge a book by its cover, Emily. I get it. This place is full of wealthy people who seem untouchable, but you need to remember that every customer is someone with their own story, someone who deserves respect." Emily nodded slowly, the words sinking in deeper than she'd expected. "I didn't mean to treat her differently," she said quietly. I thought she was just another customer." Greg sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know you didn't mean anything by it, but this is a lesson we all need to learn. We don't always know who we're talking to. And it's up to us to make sure that we treat everyone with the same level of respect, no matter what." As Greg walked away, Emily stood still, her mind spinning. She couldn't shake the image of Tasha's calm, steady gaze. The woman hadn't gotten angry, hadn't raised her voice. Instead, she had simply revealed the truth. Something Emily wasn't ready to face, but something she couldn't deny anymore. The quiet realization hung in the air. Tasha had made her aware of her own biases, her assumptions, and the ways she had let herself become part of a system that treated people differently based on appearances. And now, Emily couldn't unsee it. She was left with a choice: to change and confront her own flaws, or to keep going as she had before, blind to the lessons Tasha had so quietly taught her. And that decision, she knew, would shape the rest of her life. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Emily. She went through the motions of her usual routine, greeting customers, folding clothes, and checking stock, but her mind was 1,000 miles away. No matter how hard she tried to focus on the tasks at hand, all she could think about was Tasha and the conversation they had. The weight of Tasha's words lingered, pressing down on her with each passing moment. Emily had never realized how deeply ingrained her assumptions were until now. It was as if Tasha had peeled back the layers of her own behavior and laid them bare for her to see. As the mall started to quiet down, the bustling crowds thinning as evening approached, Emily found herself standing near the store's entrance. The bright lights of the mall cast long shadows, and for the first time in a long while, she felt uneasy. The mall, which had once felt like a place of safety and routine, now seemed like a reflection of the deeper issues she had never wanted to face. Her shift was coming to an end, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had changed in her, something she couldn't ignore. She thought about the people she had worked with over the years, the customers she had judged without thinking twice, the way she had assumed certain people didn't belong in certain places. It was all so obvious now, so clear in a way she couldn't explain. How had she gotten so used to this system, this hierarchy of privilege and judgment? The sound of the store door chiming pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see another customer enter, but this time she didn't immediately assume the usual things. She didn't immediately place a label on them based on what they wore or how they looked. She just watched them, observing them like she hadn't done before. This shift in perspective felt strange, but it was also enlightening. The customer, a young man in a well-worn hoodie and jeans, made his way to the section with discounted items. Emily glanced at him, noting the way he seemed at ease among the racks of clothes. She'd probably have assumed he wasn't a serious buyer, that he was just browsing without the intention of purchasing anything. But something inside her stopped her from making that judgment this time. "Can I help you find something?" Emily asked, her voice a little softer than usual, as if she were trying to approach him without the assumptions she'd previously held. The young man looked up, startled at first, but then smiled. "Oh, just looking for a jacket," he said, his tone casual. "Nothing too fancy, just something comfortable." Emily nodded, giving him space to browse. It wasn't the kind of interaction she was used to. Normally, she would have shown more enthusiasm, tried to push the sale, maybe even steered him toward something more expensive. But tonight, it felt different. She wanted to help, yes, but she also didn't want to assume anything about him based on what he wore or how he looked. It was a small shift, but a significant one. She continued to watch him quietly, noticing how he moved through the store with a sense of ease. There was no rushing, no discomfort. It was as if he didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Emily wondered how many customers, like him, she had misjudged over the years. How many people had come into the store only to be dismissed or ignored because they didn't fit the mold of who she thought was worthy of attention. "Do you need any help?" she asked again, her tone more open, no longer the scripted line she had been so used to delivering. The young man looked up, a little surprised but appreciative. "Actually, yeah. Do you have any jackets in, like, a medium size? I'm not sure about the fit of these." "Sure," Emily said, nodding. "Let me check in the back for you." As she walked toward the back room to check the stock, she couldn't help but feel the strange sense of relief that washed over her. The conversation with Tasha had shaken her to her core, but it had also opened her eyes to something she hadn't been willing to face. She was part of the problem, the system that made assumptions based on appearances, the same system that pushed people like the young man in the hoodie to the margins. When Emily returned with the jacket, she handed it over to the young man, who seemed genuinely grateful. "Thanks," he said, offering her a smile. "I appreciate it." "No problem," she replied, and for the first time, the words felt genuine. She wasn't just saying them because it was her job. She said them because, in that moment, she realized something important. Everyone, regardless of what they wore or how they looked, deserved the same respect, the same attention. As the young man left the store, Emily stood for a moment watching him disappear into the crowd. She realized that this was just the beginning, her journey to unlearn the prejudices and assumptions she had held for so long. And though it felt like a daunting task, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't go back to the way things were. She had to do better. For herself, for the customers, for everyone. She glanced toward the door again, half expecting to see Tasha reappear, but the woman was gone. The store felt quieter now, as though the weight of everything had shifted. The mall still hummed with life, but Emily's perspective had changed forever. And as she closed the store for the night, she knew that tomorrow things would be different. The next morning, the mall opened with its usual rhythm: clean floors, fresh displays, background music floating in the air. Emily arrived early, earlier than usual, and stood outside the boutique for a long moment before unlocking the door. She stared at the polished glass, her own reflection staring back at her, and she didn't quite recognize the person looking back. The conversation with Tasha, the heaviness of it, had followed her home and settled in her like a stone. She had barely slept. As she stepped inside, the store still smelled like fresh fabric and citrus cleaner. Everything looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. She walked to the counter and placed her bag down slowly, glancing at the floor where Tasha had stood the day before. That spot now felt sacred, like it had been burned into her memory. Before she could even start folding the early inventory delivery, her phone buzzed. A message from Greg lit up the screen. "Come to the admin office when you can. Someone wants to speak with you. Don't worry, it's not what you think." Emily felt her heart skip. The words, "someone wants to speak with you," echoed in her head, and there was only one person she could think of. She didn't reply right away. She sat for a moment, hands folded in her lap, before finally standing and walking out of the store, locking the door behind her. The administrative office was on the second floor, tucked behind the food court. Most store workers didn't go there unless something was wrong. As Emily walked through the mall, everything around her blurred. The sound of people chatting, the smell of cinnamon rolls from a nearby bakery, the hum of escalators. It all faded into the background. She was preparing herself for anything, but deep down, a small part of her hoped it really was Tasha. She wasn't ready, but she also didn't want to miss the chance to say what she hadn't been able to say before. She reached the office door, heart pounding, and knocked softly. Greg opened it with a nod, his face unreadable, and motioned for her to come in. "Go on," he said. "She's waiting inside." Emily walked in slowly, and there she was, Tasha, sitting calmly at the table, looking composed and elegant as ever. She was dressed simply again, but something about her still made the room feel smaller. She looked up at Emily and offered a polite, quiet smile. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Emily sat down carefully, her throat tight, unsure of how to begin. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said softly, eyes lowered. "I'm sure you didn't," Tasha replied, her tone gentle but firm. "But I came back because I believe in facing things head on, and I think you might have something to say." Emily nodded, slowly raising her eyes to meet Tasha's. "I do," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't treat you right yesterday. I assumed things about you that weren't true. I judged you without even realizing it." Tasha studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "That's a start," she said. "But I didn't come here for an apology. Not really." Emily frowned slightly. "Then, why?" "I came because I want to see if you're willing to learn," Tasha said. "This mall, my mall, is a reflection of more than just buildings and stores. It's a reflection of the people who work here, the way they treat customers, the way they treat each other, and I can't afford to have people here who carry quiet prejudice, even if they don't mean to." Emily's stomach twisted. "I understand. And I want to do better. I mean it." Tasha leaned back, folding her hands neatly in front of her. Words are easy, she said, but change takes effort, time, awareness. She paused for a long second, watching Emily carefully. What if I told you I wanted to involve you in a project I'm planning? A new training initiative for the mall, one that teaches staff how to recognize bias, handle customers with respect, and create an environment where everyone feels they belong. Emily blinked. You'd want me involved? After everything I said? After how I treated you? Tasha gave a small, knowing smile. Exactly because of how you treated me. You experienced the shift. You saw the difference. That makes your voice valuable. If you're honest, if you're willing to help others see it too. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She had come here expecting consequences, discipline, maybe even termination. But instead, she was being offered something completely different, a chance to grow, a chance to help fix what she had been a part of breaking. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady this time. I want to be part of it. I want to learn, and I want to help others learn too. Tasha nodded once, firm and final. Good. Then we'll begin next week. Emily exhaled, the tension in her chest releasing just a bit. As she stood to leave, she looked at Tasha again, truly seeing her now, not as a customer or a surprise mall owner, but as a woman who had chosen to lead with grace instead of anger. Thank you, she said quietly. Tasha simply replied, make it count. The next few days felt different. Emily went to work with a new sense of purpose, though the weight of her new role felt both daunting and empowering. She found herself actively listening more, not just to customers, but to her coworkers as well. The words from her conversation with Tasha echoed in her mind every time she greeted someone or walked into a room. She paid closer attention to her interactions, noticing the subtle ways she'd dismissed certain people without even thinking about it before. She'd never realized how ingrained it all was, the quick assumptions, the unconscious biases, the way she had viewed people through the lens of class and status without even noticing it. The training for the new initiative Tasha had mentioned started that Friday. Emily walked into the conference room early, nervously adjusting her shirt as she took a seat at one of the tables. The room was filled with managers and staff from different stores throughout the mall, everyone chatting quietly, unaware of the real reason they were all there. Emily sat back in her chair, trying to calm her nerves. She still wasn't sure what to expect, but she had made a promise to herself that she would do whatever it took to learn from this experience. The room fell silent when Tasha entered, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore a simple blazer and slacks, but there was an undeniable air of authority around her. She looked every bit the businesswoman, but she didn't stand on ceremony. She walked to the front of the room and addressed everyone with a quiet confidence that made the rest of the staff sit up straighter. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm sure you're all wondering why you're here today. Let me explain." Emily felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't going to be just another typical training session with generic slides and PowerPoints. She could feel it already. "I'm Tasha," she continued, glancing around the room, "and I own this mall. I'm also here today because I've noticed something I don't like. A lot of the people who come through this mall are treated differently based on who they are, what they look like, and sometimes even where they come from. It's something that's gone on for too long, and it's time we do something about it." She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Emily noticed how everyone in the room shifted a little. Some of the managers looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting to one another. But no one interrupted. Tasha had everyone's attention. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," she continued, her tone still calm but firm. "I'm here to make sure you understand that this isn't just about making sales. It's about making people feel welcome, seen, and respected. It's about creating an environment where everyone can shop, work, and exist without being judged by the way they look or who they are." Emily could feel her heart rate picking up. She wasn't sure what to expect next, but the words hit home, especially after the personal awakening she had gone through herself. She glanced around the room again and saw people nodding, some even shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one had ever said things like this to them before, not in this context. Tasha clicked a button on the projector and a slide appeared on the screen. It wasn't a typical training slide, filled with bullet points or corporate jargon. Instead, it showed a series of images. Some were photographs of real customers, others were short stories of their experiences at the mall. The faces of people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, flashed across the screen. They were smiling, talking, shopping, but they were also being ignored, avoided, or treated poorly. "Look at these faces," Tasha said, pointing to the screen. "These are the faces of people who've come into our stores, people who've been dismissed, who've been treated like they don't belong here. And if you're wondering why, it's not just because of who they are. It's because of how we as a team have made assumptions about them." The room was completely still now. Everyone was listening, really listening. Emily felt a shift in the atmosphere. Tasha wasn't just talking at them, she was making them confront something they had been avoiding. And as she sat there listening, Emily knew something important was happening. Tasha was making them aware, but more than that, she was giving them a chance to change. The session continued with Tasha diving deeper into the training, but Emily was no longer distracted by her own nerves. Instead, she was fully immersed in the conversation. She had expected this training to be uncomfortable, but it wasn't just the material that made her squirm. It was the realization that the problems Tasha was speaking about had been right in front of her the entire time, yet she had never truly seen them. The stories on the screen, stories of customers being ignored or treated poorly based on their appearance, struck a deep chord within her. Tasha spoke about unconscious biases, about how they influenced even the simplest interactions, from the way a customer was greeted to how they were treated when they walked into a store. "It's not enough to just say we don't judge people," Tasha said. "We need to take action. We need to be aware of our biases, even the ones we don't know we have." Emily thought back to her own behavior, how she had looked at certain customers and made snap judgments without a second thought. She had never questioned it. It was second nature. But now, as Tasha spoke, Emily began to see how those small actions, those tiny moments of bias, added up to something bigger. They created an atmosphere where certain people were left feeling unwanted or invisible. Tasha paused after showing the final slide, a powerful image of a customer smiling, holding a bag full of purchases, her face radiating happiness. The caption read, "When you're seen, you feel welcome. When you're welcome, you come back." "This," Tasha said, pointing to the image, "is what we're striving for, a place where everyone feels like they belong, where they don't have to second-guess whether they'll be treated with respect or not. This is the future I'm working toward, and I want you all to be part of it." The room was silent for a long moment. No one spoke. No one moved. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from discomfort. It was a quiet understanding that had settled over them. The change that Tasha was talking about was real, and it was happening now. Emily could feel it too. She wasn't just learning about how to be a better salesperson. She was learning how to be a better person, how to see people as individuals, not as stereotypes or assumptions. Tasha's voice broke the silence. "I'm not going to lie to you. This will be hard. It won't happen overnight. But if we're going to create a place where everyone feels welcome, we have to start here. We have to start with ourselves." Emily nodded. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after everything she had learned. She wasn't the same person she had been just a few days ago, and whatever came next, she was ready to face it. Tasha's gaze swept across the room, meeting each person's eyes. Let's get to work. The days that followed the training felt like a slow but steady transformation. Emily approached her job with a new sense of responsibility, and not just in terms of customer service, but in how she interacted with her co-workers as well. She found herself questioning the assumptions she had once made about everyone around her. She noticed things she hadn't seen before, little actions, words, and looks exchanged between staff members that hinted at the subtle biases they held, even if they didn't realize it. She became more conscious of her language, making sure to avoid phrases or terms that could inadvertently offend someone or make them feel less than. She began to take her time with each customer, not rushing to label them based on how they dressed or how they spoke. She wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but Emily was committed to making a change. The work wasn't just about doing what was expected anymore. It was about making everyone who walked into the store feel like they truly mattered. One afternoon, just after a busy lunch rush, Emily noticed a family of 4 walk into the boutique. They were casually dressed, nothing particularly expensive about their clothes. The father carried an old backpack, the kind that seemed to have been through a lot of use. The mother wore simple sneakers, and the children looked like they were just here to have fun. A typical customer, Emily thought, someone who likely wasn't going to buy much. She felt that familiar urge to preemptively categorize them, but before she could even take a step toward them, the words from the training echoed in her head. Don't assume, don't judge. Treat them all the same. Emily took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't know their story, didn't know their intentions. She could feel herself pausing before approaching them, and it felt different, in a good way. She smiled at the family and greeted them warmly. Hello, can I help you find anything today? The father smiled back, the lines on his face softening. Actually, we're just looking for something for our daughter, he said, glancing at the little girl, no more than 7, who was holding her mother's hand tightly. Emily nodded and led them to the kids' section, where they began looking at a selection of jackets. She noticed how the father seemed genuinely appreciative of the way Emily took the time to guide them through the options. It wasn't until the conversation drifted toward their daughter's birthday that Emily learned they weren't just any family. They were in town to visit a relative who had recently opened a business, and they had decided to treat their daughter to a new jacket as part of her birthday surprise. The father, who she had initially written off as someone who probably couldn't afford the nicer items, was actually looking for something special. The family ended up purchasing a beautiful jacket, and Emily made sure they felt welcome and valued, offering a small discount that wasn't needed but was appreciated. As they left, the father gave her a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for treating us like we matter, he said, his voice sincere. Emily smiled, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction spread through her chest. That moment, so simple yet so powerful, was exactly what Tasha had been talking about. It wasn't about what people wore or how much they could afford. It was about making people feel seen, valued, and respected. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was doing that. The weeks that followed brought more changes, both in Emily and in the way the staff interacted with customers. Tasha's training had opened a door that Emily didn't even know existed, and as time passed, she noticed more of her colleagues beginning to shift as well. They started asking questions about their biases, about the customers they might have overlooked, about the assumptions they made without even realizing it. Emily found herself in conversations with her coworkers more than she ever had before. They'd talk about how the training had impacted them, how they had begun to catch themselves when they made assumptions. There was an openness now, a willingness to learn, and it wasn't just because Tasha was their boss. It was because they realized that they had the power to make a real difference. One afternoon, as Emily was organizing the store's new shipment, Greg stopped by the boutique to check in. He'd been one of the few who had been particularly resistant to the new training when it was first announced. He had a long history of managing in the mall and didn't see a real need for these changes. But Emily noticed that he had been quieter in recent weeks, more reflective. "Hey, Emily," Greg said, as he walked into the store, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Got a minute?" "Sure, Greg," Emily replied, turning to face him. "What's up?" He scratched his chin thoughtfully before speaking. "I've been thinking about something. After that training, I've started paying more attention to the way we talk to customers. And I got to admit, I didn't realize how much I'd been missing before, not just in customers, but in how we treat each other here." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Really?" Greg nodded slowly. "Yeah. I mean, it wasn't exactly something I was looking for, but it's been on my mind. The thing is, I've realized how much more people open up when they feel like they're being seen for who they are, not just what they look like or how much money they have." He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I guess I didn't want to admit it at first, but it's made a difference. And it's kind of changed the way I view things." Emily smiled softly. "I think we're all still learning, Greg. But the important thing is that we're trying." He smiled back, a genuine warmth in his expression. "Yeah, I guess you're right." He paused for a moment, then added, "Thanks for sticking with it. You've made a bigger impact than you realize." For the first time in a while, Emily felt proud, not of herself, but of what they were all accomplishing together. She was seeing the shift, and she knew it wasn't just about making the mall more profitable. It was about changing lives, making people feel welcome, seen, and valued. As Greg left the store, Emily stood for a moment, taking in the changes around her. There was still work to be done, of course, but the progress was undeniable. People were learning, they were changing, and Emily knew that, in the end, this wasn't just about how they treated customers, it was about how they treated themselves, how they grew, how they learned from each other. And she was a part of it, a part of something bigger than herself, something that was making a difference in ways she never thought possible. It was a month later when Emily found herself standing at the front of the store, watching the usual crowd of customers filter through the mall. The changes in herself and her colleagues were becoming more and more apparent every day. There was a new energy in the air, one that felt more inclusive, more welcoming. As the mall's most dedicated shoppers strolled past, they seemed to feel the difference, too. The interactions were more sincere, less transactional. Customers walked in and immediately felt like they were in a place where they could be themselves. There was no longer that invisible barrier between the customers and the staff. The space was warmer, more genuine. One afternoon, just as Emily was adjusting a display near the entrance, Tasha walked into the store. She didn't need to announce her presence. Everyone knew her, and her quiet authority filled the room the moment she stepped inside. She made her way over to Emily with a slight smile. "You're doing well," Tasha said, her voice soft but carrying. "I've noticed a real difference here." Emily paused for a moment, taking in Tasha's words. She couldn't help but smile back. "It's been a team effort. We've all been trying to change how we approach things." Tasha nodded, her eyes scanning the store. "It shows. The atmosphere is different. People are more engaged, both customers and employees. It's not just about what's on the racks anymore. It's about how they feel when they walk in." Emily felt a swell of pride, but also a bit of disbelief. Just a few months ago, she had been a part of the problem. She had been someone who made assumptions about people based on their appearance or what they wore. But now the idea of making those snap judgments felt foreign to her. She was learning how to see people, not as categories, not as objects, but as real, complex individuals. Tasha's gaze softened as she looked back at Emily. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for taking the lead. You've shown real growth, and that's not something everyone can say." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't expect to be leading anything," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I just wanted to be better. For the customers. For everyone here." Tasha smiled, clearly proud of the progress Emily had made. "You've done more than that. You've shown others that it's possible to change, that it's possible to treat people better. And that kind of leadership, the kind that comes from within, is exactly what this place needs." Emily swallowed, feeling a lump in her throat. This was the validation she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't just about the work they were doing. It was about the impact they were having on the people who walked through the door. They were making a real difference. It was hard to quantify, hard to measure, but it was there, palpable, in the way customers smiled when they were greeted, in the way they lingered in the store, making genuine connections with the staff. "We're not perfect," Emily said, still processing everything Tasha had said, "but we're trying." Tasha nodded, her eyes gleaming with understanding. "That's all anyone can ask for. Keep it up." As Tasha left the store, Emily took a deep breath, standing there in the quiet for a moment. It wasn't just the store that had changed. It was her, too. And, though the journey wasn't over, Emily knew that she was part of something bigger now. Something that would continue to grow, continue to evolve. She was a part of a movement, a small but significant force for change within them all, one that would ripple out and affect everyone who passed through. The months that followed were filled with even more shifts, small, gradual changes that made a world of difference. The training initiatives continued, and Emily found herself more and more involved in the planning and execution of the sessions. She had become an unofficial leader among the staff, someone others turned to for advice and guidance. It wasn't something she had sought out, but it had become a natural part of who she was now. She realized she didn't need a title to make an impact. All she had to do was lead by example and encourage others to do the same. One day, Tasha called Emily into the office again. This time, it wasn't for a training session or a conversation about customer service. It was something bigger. Emily felt a flutter of anticipation as she walked through the doors of the admin office, where Tasha was waiting with a warm, welcoming smile. "Hey, Emily," Tasha said, motioning for her to sit down. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's up?" Tasha leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the progress you've made, not just in your own development, but in how you've helped the team change. You've gone beyond what I expected. You've taken the lessons from the training and turned them into action, and that's something I truly respect." Emily felt a small sense of pride swelling in her chest, but she didn't interrupt. She was listening intently, her curiosity piqued. "I've been working on a project to expand the mall's community outreach," Tasha continued. "We've been talking about diversity and inclusivity, but now I want to bring that outside of these walls. I want to create initiatives that help people in our community, especially those who feel overlooked or marginalized, and I want you to be a part of it." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, me?" she asked, her voice full of surprise. "You want me to help with that?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, I think you're ready. You've already shown that you understand the importance of making people feel welcome and seen. You've been living that in the store every day, and now I want you to take that to a larger scale." Emily sat back in her chair, processing what Tasha was saying. The thought of taking what they had done in the store and applying it to the wider community was both exciting and intimidating. But Emily knew, without a doubt, that she couldn't turn down this opportunity. It was more than just a chance to lead. It was a chance to truly make a difference. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'm in." Tasha smiled, her eyes lighting up with pride. "I knew you would be. We're going to do something great, Emily. Together." As Emily left the admin office, a feeling of purpose washed over her. This wasn't just about customer service anymore. This was about creating lasting change, not just in the mall, but in the community as a whole. And she was ready to be a part of that change. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind of action and purpose. Emily, alongside Tasha, began organizing community outreach programs that focused on inclusivity and diversity. They started small, offering free workshops on resume building, hosting job fairs for people in underserved areas, and collaborating with local organizations to provide resources for individuals who felt excluded from opportunities. As the weeks passed, more and more people came forward, eager to participate and get involved. Emily was amazed at how many people wanted to be part of something that aimed to make them feel seen, valued, and respected. At the same time, the changes in the mall continued. The employees, who had once been skeptical or resistant to the idea of customer service training, were now enthusiastic participants. They held open discussions after their shifts, reflecting on their experiences, asking questions, and supporting one another in the process of self-discovery. The atmosphere in the mall had shifted, and it was no longer just about sales or bottom lines. It was about human connection, about fostering a place where people could come and feel like they belonged. One afternoon, as Emily was walking through the mall on her way to a meeting with a community partner, she stopped by the boutique to check in on the staff. She smiled as she watched her colleagues interacting with customers, their faces warm, their body language open. She was proud of the progress they had made, and it was clear that this change wasn't temporary. It was becoming part of the mall's DNA. It was then that she saw him, the father from a few months ago, the one with the backpack, buying the jacket for his daughter. He was standing in front of the boutique, talking with a sales associate. His daughter was beside him, holding a small stuffed animal and beaming up at her dad. The sight of them immediately brought a smile to Emily's face. It wasn't just the jacket he had bought for his daughter. It was the way they had been treated, the way they had been seen for who they truly were, not just customers, but people with stories, people with dignity. She watched as the father waved goodbye to the associate and started to walk away. Without thinking, Emily walked up to him. "Hey, I just wanted to thank you again," she said with a smile, "for giving us the chance to serve you." The father turned to her, his face lighting up with recognition. "You know, you've got a great team here," he said. "It's not often you get treated with that kind of respect at a store." Emily felt a lump in her throat, but she managed to keep her composure. "That means a lot. We've been working really hard to make sure everyone feels that way." The father smiled again, his eyes warm. "Well, I can tell. You've certainly made me feel like I matter." As he walked away with his daughter, Emily stood there for a moment, watching them disappear into the crowd. A small tear welled up in her eye, but she didn't wipe it away. It wasn't sadness, it was pride. Pride in the changes they had made, pride in how far they had come, and pride in knowing that this wasn't just about business. It was about making people feel like they belonged. And for Emily, that was the true measure of success. A few months later, Tasha called Emily into her office again. This time, Emily didn't feel nervous. She had become accustomed to the rhythm of her new role, to the sense of purpose that had transformed not just her, but the entire team around her. She walked into the office with a sense of anticipation and was met with a smile from Tasha, who gestured for her to sit down. "I've been thinking," Tasha said, her voice calm but full of intent. "You've made a real impact here, not just in the store, but in the larger community initiative. People are noticing the difference we're making, and I think it's time we take this to the next level." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Tasha leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp with determination. "I mean that it's time for you to step into a leadership role, a role that will help shape the future of this mall, and potentially other malls in the area. You've shown me that you have the ability to lead with compassion, to understand what it takes to build real connections, and I believe you're ready." Emily blinked, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this, not in the way she had imagined. "You want me to lead here?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, not just in customer service, but in creating an environment that fosters inclusivity, diversity, and respect. You've already proven that you understand these values, and I think you're the perfect person to help us expand that vision." For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. The idea of leadership, true leadership, had never seemed like something she could achieve. But now, hearing Tasha's words, it felt within her reach. She had come so far from the person who had once made snap judgments about others. She had learned what it meant to see people for who they truly were, and now she had the opportunity to lead others in doing the same. "I don't know what to say," Emily said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Tasha smiled, a knowing expression on her face. "Say yes." And just like that, Emily knew that this was the next step in her journey, one that she was ready to take. It wasn't just about the mall anymore, or the community projects, or the training sessions. It was about creating something lasting, something bigger than herself. It was about leading a change that would ripple through not only the mall, but the people in it. "I say yes," Emily finally replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Tasha stood up, extending her hand. "Then let's make this happen." As they shook hands, Emily felt a sense of excitement and gratitude fill her. This was the beginning of something new, something important. And for the first time in a long time, she knew that her journey had only just begun.